Elves, trolls, giants. Nordic folklore is full of mystical and fantastical creatures. Some of these beings still linger in our Christmas traditions today, though often in a friendlier form than their original folklore. In today's festive episode of Nordic Curiosities, we are sidestepping history a bit to dive into that folklore. The trio that we will meet have all become connected to Christmas. We have the diminutive magical housekeeper, the horned competitor to Santa Claus, and the giant cat that eats people. Join me as we explore the mysterious beings of the Yuletide. The story of our first Christmas critter begins long before Christianity ever came to the Nordics. His name in Swedish, Gårdstomten, or simply Tomten, is a little tricky to translate into English, but let's break it down. For the most part, the name is translated into gnome, and when seeing him, most English speakers will probably say, "That's a gnome." This is generally a fine translation. However, the Swedish name holds a bit more nuance. The root word tomt is the homestead or lot of land that your house stands on, and the tomte is the guardian of this homestead, so a sort of house god. He cares for the animals and brings fortune and prosperity to the homestead, as long as you're nice to him. Tomten is a grumpy little man and can be easily offended. To keep in his good graces, you need to treat him with respect. Mistreating the animals will also bring his ire and misfortune to the homestead, as he cares much for their well being. Tomten is also a mischievous little fellow and will play tricks on those in the household that he doesn't like, including hiding important objects from them. One way to keep in his good graces is to give him a bowl of porridge now and then. He's very fond of it. However, you shouldn't give him too much, as this will make him lazy and complacent, again bringing misfortune to the homestead. So you should give him a lagom amount, as we would say in Swedish. Not too little, not too much, but just the right amount. Tomten generally remains invisible to humans and only ever shows himself to the head of the household. When he does appear, he is a bearded man about 2 feet tall, wearing a red pointed hat and a grey or brown coat. This image has been almost permanently solidified in the collected Swedish consciousness by the paintings and illustrations by Jenny Nyström and the poem Tomten by Viktor Rydberg in the late 1800s. The 1800s also bring in the Christmas connection. Saint Nicholas, commonly known as Santa Claus, was borrowed from Germany and in Sweden collided with the image of Tomten and became Jultomten, the Yule Tomte or Yule Gnome. Here, Tomten loses his grumpy persona and becomes more jolly like his continental counterpart. His role changes, no longer a guardian of the homestead, but a bringer of Christmas presents. His fondness for porridge, however, remains. His method of bringing presents differs from what people in the Anglosphere, like Americans, may be used to. He doesn't sneak in through the chimney during the night like some kind of burglar, but instead he's more polite. He knocks on your door on Christmas Eve and personally hands out the presents. This tradition is common in Sweden, Norway, Denmark, and Finland. In Iceland, there is instead a whole troop of 13 Jólasveinarnir, the Yule lads, that show up in the days leading up to Christmas Eve, leaving presents in shoes and boots. These guys are more related to trolls than to tomten, and we will meet them again later in this episode. Also, my Finnish viewers would like me to point this out. Santa Claus does not live at the North Pole, but in Rovaniemi in Finland. What proof do I have? Well, there's a Santa village in Rovaniemi, and at the North Pole, there's nothing but ice. So, case closed. North Pole, ice. Finland, Santa's got an address. Jultomten wasn't the first individual to bring Christmas gifts to the Scandinavians. His precursor in this role was a bit more goatish. Our next Christmas critter is Julbocken, the Yule goat. And your first question here is probably, why a goat? To answer that, we again need to travel further back in history to the Norse days. Goats held a special place in Norse mythology, and the most important of which were the two goats of Thor, Tangnoistur and Tangrisnir. They pulled Thor's chariots across the skies. There's also a very old tradition of slaughtering a goat at Yuletide, so midwinter, which was later replaced by making Yule bread in the shape of a goat. If this is the origin of the later Yule goat remains a mystery. The traditions around the Yule goat are many and varied, but we can go through some of the more prominent examples. The earliest mention of a Christmas tradition involving a goat appears in the 1700s. Youngsters went around the farms and homestead at Yuletide and sang songs, for which they received food, drink, or money. So basically, an 18th century form of caroling. One of the youngsters would be dressed as a goat with a mask made from straw. This tradition lived on until the mid 1900s in Sweden. In the early 1800s, this tradition morphed into the Yule goat becoming the bringer of Christmas presents. A man dressed in a coat with a goat mask and horns would visit households on Christmas Eve. He could also be used as a threat for misbehaving children. If you don't behave, the Yule goat will butt you with his horns. There is, however, no evidence that this was ever done in practice. The Yule goat would later be superseded by the more friendly looking Santa Claus in Sweden, Jultomten. In Ostrobothnia, the Swedish speaking region of western Finland, the bringer of Christmas gifts is still called Julbocken, and in some other parts of Finland he also still has this role, going by the name of Julbocken. Those of you who know more about German and other Christmas traditions might now be saying, well, Robin, what you're describing now is clearly Krampus. While there are similarities between the Yule goat and Krampus, Santa's devilish companion in Catholic traditions, it remains unclear if the connection is anything more than just coincidental. Unlike Krampus, Julbocken isn't demonic, he's just stern and symbolic. A widely spread tradition still alive today is to make goats out of straw, often with a wooden frame, and put them near the Christmas tree or at the table. Some old traditions from Dalsland in Sweden involve serving food to the goat as well. He is seen as an important part of the Christmas celebration and a bringer of luck. The straw goat didn't always stay at home. A game that could be played was to take the goat to a neighbor and, without being discovered, leave it there. The neighbor would then do the same, and the goat would wander across the neighborhood and in nearby villages. It was often accompanied by letters of well wishes and rhymes. All of this was done in the good and well meaning spirits. These straw goats aren't necessarily small. They're often larger goats, meters in height, standing in town squares around Scandinavia. The biggest and most famous of these Yule goats is the one in Gävle, Sweden, Gävlebocken. It reaches a height of about 13 meters and weighs around 3 tons. It's also illegally set on fire every other year or so. Gävlebocken and that tradition should probably be its own episode at some point. While the Yule goat could butt you, it could be way worse. You could be eaten by our next critter. Our final critter is of the fluffy variety, Jólakötturinn, the Yule Cat. To meet it, we head to Iceland, and to uncover its origins, we again journey back to the Norse era. While written sources for the Yule Cat only appear as late as the 1800s, it is alleged to be much older. It is said to be the pet of the ogress Grylla, ogress being a female ogre. Grylla is first mentioned in the 13th century sagas, such as the Islandica saga, Sverris saga, and the Prose Edda. Supposedly, she's enormous and repulsive and has a taste for human flesh, especially children. Like our other critters, she originally had no connection to Christmas. Mentions of her are sparse until we enter the 17th century and the poem of Grylla. This is where the Christmas connection comes in, and also the Yule lads, Jólasveinarnir. They are the sons of Grylla. Their number and depiction vary greatly depending on location, but a common trait is that they are used as a warning for disobedient children. Behave or the Jólasveinarnir will come and get you. An Icelandic family of boogeymen, if you like. The number of Yule lads being specifically 13 comes from the 1862 collection of poems by author Jon Arnason, Isländskar fjöldsägor och äventyr, Icelandic fall tales and fairy tales. Arnason had been inspired by the German brothers Grimm and began collecting stories of Icelandic folklore. But what about the Yule Cat? It prowls into the story in the same collection, described as a giant monstrous feline that, like Grylla, enjoyed the taste of human flesh. The idea was that the peasants of Iceland needed to complete the work on the year's wool, and thus making new clothes, before Christmas. If they didn't, the Yule Cat would come and eat them. A less gruesome version has the cat eat the food of the people not wearing new clothes for Christmas, rather than eating the people themselves. Arnason names no sources or origins for the Yule Cat, but as such written sources for folklore tend to be scarce, since they're often oral traditions, we can probably let that slide. In 1932, Johannes Ur Köttlum published a collection of poems known as Jolin Komma, Christmas is Coming. This collection contains the poem Jólakötturinn. It's here that the Yule Cat's reputation as a man-eating monster is hammered home. It prowls the snowy Icelandic landscape at Yuletide and eats anyone who hasn't received new clothes for Christmas. The poem doesn't mention any connection to Grylla or the Yule lads, but they do appear elsewhere in the collection. We get the names and personalities of all the 13 Yule lads, like Gluggagegir, the window peeper, and Hurðaskellir, the door slammer. And these aren't just nicknames, they are the literal translations of their Icelandic names and their main personality traits. They're like rude Icelandic smurfs. With Jolin Komma and Jólakötturinn, the Yule Cat was firmly established as part of Icelandic Christmas folklore and remains so to this day. So if you can't find your car keys tomorrow morning, chances are you've offended Tomten. So better serve him his porridge. While you're at it, you can also serve some Christmas food to the Yule goat. And if Grandma gives you yet another knitted sweater for Christmas, thank her. She's saving you from becoming cat food. Thank you for watching and Merry Christmas! Midvinternattens köld är hård, stjärnorna gnistra och glimma. Alla sova i enslig gård, djupt under midnattstimma. Månen vandrar sin tysta ban, snön lyser vit på fur och gran. Snön lyser vit på taken, endast tomten är vaken. Står där så grå vid lagårdsdörr, grå mot en vita driva. Tittar som många vintrar förr, upp emot månens skiva. Tittar mot skogen där gran och fur drar kring gården sin dunkla mur. Grubblar fast ej eller båta över en underlig gåta. För sin hand genom skägg och hår, skakar huvud och hetta. Nej, denna gåta är allt för svår. Nej, jag gissar ej detta. Slår som han plägar inom kort, slika spröjande tankar bort. Går att ordna och pyssla, går att sköta sin syssla. Går till visthus och redskapshus, känner på alla låsen. Korna drömmar vid månens ljus, sommardrömmar i båsen. Glömsk av sele och pisk och töm, Polle i stallet har och en dröm. Krubban han lutar över, fylls av duftande klöver. Går till stängslet för lamm och får, ser hur det sova där inne. Går till hönsen där tuppen står, stolt på sin högsta pinne. Karo i hundbots halm mår gott, vaknar och viftar på svansen smått. Karo sin tomte känner, de är och gode vänner. Tomten smyger sig sist att se, husbondsfolket kära. Länge och väl har han märkt att det hålla hans flit i ära. Barnens kammar han sen på tå nalkas att se de söta små. Ingen må det förtrycka, det är hans största lycka. Så har han sett en far och son, ren genom många leder. Slumra som barn, men varifrån kommo dig väl hit neder? Släkte följde på släkte snart, blomstrade åldrades gick, men vart? Gåtan som icke låter, gissa sig, kom ej åter. Tomten vandrar till ladans loft, där har han bo och fäste. Högt på skullen i höets doft, nära vid svalans näste. Nu är väl svalans boning tom, men till våren med blad och blom kommer hon nog tillbaka, följd av sin näpna maka. Då har hon alltid att kvittra om mången ett färdeminne, intet likväl om gåtan som rör sig i tomtens sinne. Genom en springa i ladans vägg lyser månen på gubbens skägg. Strimman på skägget blänker, tomten grubblar och tänker. Tyst är skogen och nejden all, livet där ute är fruset. Blott från fjärran av forsens fall höres helt sakta bruset. Tomten lyssnar och halvt i dröm tycker sig höra tidens ström. Undrar vart hän den skall fara, undrar var källan må vara. Midvinternatten kölder hård, stjärnorna gnistra och glimma. Alla sova i enslig gård, gott intill morgontimma. Månen sänker sin tysta ban, snön lyser vit på fur och gran. Snön lyser vit på taken, endast tomten är vaken.